Tuesday Drive.
Now, I'm asking you today, of course, what's your favourite flavour of cordial, or if you don't drink it now, but you did as a kid when your mum used to make it, can you remember what your favourite flavour was? Now, Tina X has got in touch with us via our Triple UFM Instagram page, and she says definitely raspberry. And Tina, you are a girl after my own heart, because that was definitely one of my favourite flavours of cordial as a kid as well. I've got to say, I always used to remember Mum having a jug made up in the fridge for us kids, and as I revealed before, I was never a fan of the orange because it didn't quite taste like orange, but then what cordial does, I hear you ask. The other point about cordial while I'm on my soapbox is that it seems to be something we take for granted. It's always been there in our lives, hasn't it? It's there at the supermarket when we walk down the aisle. But what is the history of this well-known sugary syrup? Well, I can't answer that, and I don't think my next guest can either. But what he can share with us is how cordial touched the Shoalhaven for a number of years. Now, joining me is former South Coast registered journalist and our local historian, Alan Clarke, who's not only taken an interest in cordial, but he's just released a book. Welcome to the show, Alan.
Thank you, Stephen.
Now, what prompted you to write a book about cordial?
Oh, it's just one of those interesting subjects that been around. It started here in the 19th century, and there was no Coca-Cola available in those days, and there were little factories scattered around the state, and Nowra always had at least one for a long time, and they produced, we call it loosely cordials, but they were also aerated waters which had the fizzy part of them. But it was a vastly different industry to what it is today.
So what was one of the first ones in the Shoalhaven then?
Yeah, probably the first people to do it were members of the Pollock family. William Pollock, he had a factory here in 1882, and he made up a variety of drinks that he delivered around the district to the hotels and to local people, and he went around in his horse and cart with all these drinks.
Did they ever explode? Do you know? If you had those...
Sorry,
did they ever explode, these bottles, if he had some aerated drinks on the back of his cart?
I'm sure they would have, but they didn't often get a mention in the paper.
I could imagine not. So what were some of the...
Much of my research is done by reading local newspapers, and very often there's just a paragraph here and there, and my method is to tie them all together to tell a story. But there would have been the occasional one that exploded, and but these bottles, they were many of them were imported from England, and that they were used over and over again by the Cordial-Makers of the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
Now, you've mentioned these bottles that were imported from England. Is it true that back in the day, Cordial-Makers used to get a little cranky when their bottles were, well, let's just say, misused?
Yes, that they did very much. The well-established ones would have their names on their bottles, and every now and then a newcomer to town, he'd wouldn't be very particular on whose bottles he used, and he'd put his own cordials into the opposition's bottles.
Ooh.
And then there were the bottles that had marbles in them that helped to keep the gas in, and they had to be dislodged inside the bottle to so that you could get your drink. And of course, when they were empty, there was the occasional boy who smashed the bottle to get the marbles out, and occasionally there'd be somebody taken to court for doing that.
Really, to court? Was that serious?
Yes, there's some small boys finished up in court, but
wow.
I don't think they were heavily fined or anything, but it did happen.
Now, Alan, you mentioned the Pollock family was one of the first here in the Shoalhaven. What's the story with the man named Alexander Pollock. And what did he do with his cordial, and what does it have to do with Christopher Columbus?
Well, they had these international exhibitions in various parts of the world. There was one in Australia in 1888, but then Shoalhaven was getting a group of exhibits ready for the 1893 World Fair in Chicago. That celebrated the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus's voyage of discovery. And Alexander got together this selection of his drinks, and they were sent with the New South Wales exhibit over to Chicago, and there were quite a number of different varieties that he sent, and he actually won a medal because of the quality of his drinks, which I think it's remarkable because it would have taken some months for the drinks to get to America for starters, and then when they're opened, well, they must have been still in good shape to earn a medal. And
I was going to say, it almost sounds like it was a very, very early version of a Destination New South Wales tourism exhibition event.
Exactly, yes. Just like the expos that came 100 years later. But Alexander, he had to wait a couple of years before the medal arrived, even though he knew that he'd won something. But it took years for the certificate and medal to arrive. And thereafter, he always put that he'd won a medal in Chicago on his letterheads and billheads, just to remind people that he'd had this success.
Well, the fact that he had to wait 2 years for it, Alan, I don't blame the man, that's for sure.
No, I think he deserved it.
Now,
and a little bit later, after he'd had this success, well, he took over the licence of the Bridge Hotel, and of course he sold his drinks there. But his health was failing then, and eventually, when he died, his wife held the licence for a few years. So he's a colourful man in Nowra's history.
So it sounds like he has a few more stories around him then.
Yes, there are.
Now, Alan, the other family I believe is the Kelly family. What's their association with the Shoalhaven and Cordial?
Yeah, well, James Kelly arrived in 1912, and he actually took over the factory that Alexander Pollock had been using some years earlier. And he took it over from a fellow by the name of Thomas, who'd learnt the trade in England and spent time in New Zealand before he was at Nowra for a while. And we've actually got one of Thomas's large-size stone jars in the Nowra Museum, which is remarkable considering he was only here for a short time. Anyway, he was succeeded by James Kelly in 1912, and his family had the Nowra Cordial factory in Nowra, obviously, for over 50 years, and some of his sons enlisted for World War II, but they kept it going, and after that, and they kept on with the factory until September 1968, when it was burnt down. It was a huge event, the Cordial factory fire. It happened on a Saturday morning, and there were hundreds of people gathered on the footpath to watch it, but there was nothing could be saved from the factory, and that virtually ended the cordial industry on the local level.
That's really sad to think that the fire just stopped an industry like that when it sounds like it was doing so well.
Yes, it was holding its own, but anyway, the bigger manufacturers were probably starting to have an impact then. But anyway, there's still members of the Kelly family around the district, and they're very proud of their family's association with the industry.
Based on the research that you've undertaken, do you know what some of the popular flavours were back in the days?
I've got a list of the ones that the Kellys had towards the finish, and because their archives, of course, they had lemonade, and then they had just fruit, lemon and orange. They had imitation pineapple, dry ginger ale, lime and soda, grapefruit, and then there are a couple of mystery to me. I'm not sure what sparkle was, or Queen's Toast. but they had a great variety of flavours, and I guess Passiona was probably the favourite one. It seems to be amongst people from that era.
Oh, I don't know about you, but that Queen's Toast sounds very, very, very interesting. I'd be very interested to know what that tasted like.
Yes, somebody might come out of the woodwork and tell us what it was.
Sure, surely it can't be literal. It can't be. It cannot taste like a piece of toast. It just can't. No.
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 That might be good enough to toast the Queen, perhaps.
Yeah, that's a good. I like that. I like that. Hey, I feel like I've got to ask you this question, Alan. Do you have a favourite flavour of cordial at all?
Oh, probably creaming soda nowadays. Yeah, that's probably fine. It comes in pink or brown colours, but it's probably my favourite.
This is Tuesday Drive.